With the NHL on a long pause before Christmas and a third of the season complete, it's time to take a look at what's been working for the Edmonton Oilers in 2021-22 and at what needs more work.
Well, the power play, which was been number one in the league for a couple of years, is still number one in the league. Not quite as lethal as it was early in the season, but they're still over 30%. So that's the equivalent of one goal on the power play every game. So theoretically, they're up a goal before the game starts if they get 3 power plays. So that's working. Same people that have been on the power play are still running the power play with McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and Tyson Barrie in the point. And I think there's been a little switch, I think, in terms of the people they're using for the net front. I think the 2 people they've got now with Hyman and Jesse Puljujarvi, that works really well. Puljujarvi is a bigger body that can shield, and Hyman is good at digging the pucks out of the corners when they shoot the puck. So the net front is working very well too, and they just seem to alternate. Like their special teams, I guess, are still working quite well. Their penalty kills in the top 10 and their power plays first. So when it comes to the special teams, there are lots of teams in this league that as soon as you take a penalty, you're going, uh-oh. It's not the case for the Oilers, and it has not been the case for the Oilers for several years. So that part of it, with Jim Playfair and Glenn Gulletson looking after Gulletson the power play and Playfair the penalty kill, that's working very well.
Same thing that's always working the best for the Edmonton Oilers, and that's McDavid and Draisaitl. I think as much as there is a little more depth in the top 6, obviously, with Hyman and Puljujarvi being hot and cold. But generally speaking, this team begins and ends with those 2, and they've been great again. Some of the other stuff is, 4 or 5 years down the road, and we're still talking about some of the same problems. But in terms of what's working, I would say those 2 guys, the goaltending has been, as much as it's maligned, it's probably been more good than bad for them. They've had some nights where you let in the spotty one, but generally speaking, it's been good enough to give them a chance most nights.
5-on-5 still needs work. We've been hammering that all year. The 5-on-5 is still, they give up more than they score 5-on-5, and that cannot. By the time the playoffs come around, that cannot be the situation, because in the playoffs you don't get as many power plays, and as we all know, that McDavid didn't even draw a penalty in the playoffs last year. So you can't rest your laurels on the power play in the playoffs. You need to be better and outscore teams 5-on-5. And part of that is keeping the puck in the other team's end longer. If you're not solid in your own end, make sure the puck's in the other team's end 200 feet away. And the third line was doing a good job of that early in the season with Fogle and Cassian and Derek Ryan, and then they really fell off. So that part of it was one of the, a major reason why they're not even 50-50 on the goals for and against, because that line was bleeding goals. So that has to still get better. And that's, I always think 5-on-5 play is hard work, as much as skill. Get the puck in the other team's end and keep it down there. And then if you score, great. If you don't score, you're still a long way away from your net. So that has to, their work habits have to get better. 5-on-5, keep the puck in the other team's end.
How long have we been talking about depth scoring? And it's hard to be one of those guys, because you don't get a whole bunch of ice time. You don't get any power play gravy time. It's not a lot of teams give the entire 2 minutes to basically one unit. And that has a trickle-down impact. Like if you don't have a second unit, there are guys on the ice who aren't getting the minutes, who aren't getting the gravy time, who aren't getting the touches, who aren't getting the confidence that comes with putting up offense on the power play. The special teams can bleed into the 5-on-5 stuff. So from that standpoint, it's understandable. And late in the game, if the score is close or the Oilers are down by 1, what do? Like they roll those guys out for 10 minutes of the third period, and it's, again, some of the other players are frozen out a little bit, but it's a chicken and egg thing, right? If the supporting cast was a little better out of the gate, he would be able to roll 4 lines a little more than he has now. And maybe he has a short leash with them, or it's easy to just say, hey, Connor and Leon can do it because they always do it. But generally speaking, you need that depth scoring because, as we've seen in the playoffs too many times, you're not going to win with two guys. That 9-1 start at the beginning of the year kind of really skewed things because over the last 17, 18 games, they've been a 500 team, and that's, there's that initial power play that was clicking at 40%, and they were getting some of those nights where the goalie was just standing on his head, or McDavid and Draisaitl were guaranteed 3 and 4 points a night. Like, that was all fantastic, and it was brilliant. And we can talk about all the records from the 80s that fell and things that had never been accomplished before in 20 or 30 years. But you knew it wasn't going to last. You knew that the bedrock of a good playoff team has to be a big, strong, hardworking, disciplined team that can roll 4 lines and gets production from its third line and gets hard minutes and special teams play from its fourth line and has 3 solid pairings on defense. And they're not there yet. There's a long way to go. They have some pieces that they can move a little bit, but they're not by any stretch of the imagination a team that if the playoffs started right now, you would say, yeah, the Oilers can contend for the conference, because the take away that 9-1 start and look at what you've seen since then. And it's, there's a lot of, and they know that they're the first ones to admit it. They're not fooling themselves or pretending anything, but this, the last 2/3 of the season here are going to be important in terms of how that team changes the way it plays and the people that it has in those positions. They might have to make some moves, or they might have to get some players who've been, playing at this level to pull it up a bit, because that's the way it has to be in the playoffs. And you saw Fogle, like everybody was like, oh, this guy's, not producing. He's not doing anything. You give him a little bump and he played a great game. So, it's in there. They just have to find the right chemistry on what this team has to look like if it's going to be a 3 and 4 line playoff contending team.
I think the top 6 is sort of still a work in progress. The question is, do the Oilers want to have Nugent Hopkins playing on the wing on one of those lines at center, or do they really want to play 3 centers? It may end up getting to, Connor on one line, Leon on another line, and Nugent Hopkins centering the third line. And then they'd have the third line center spot, tied up. Now then they got to do some more scrambling on the wing, find combinations that work. So as it is now, it's still too top heavy with McDavid and Draisaitl getting all the points, playing together.